and we will rebuild the National Health Service out of 18 years of Tory disgrace.
In relation to the original decision, as I'd be very happy to explain, but it hasn't been handled well, and for that I take full responsibility, and I apologise for that. I suppose what I would say to you is that perhaps I didn't focus on this and the seriousness of it in the way that I should, as I was focusing on other issues. And in part, which is why I feel, in one sense, hurt and upset by what has been written about this, that, I mean, I would never, ever do something wrong or improper or change a policy because someone supported or donated to the Labour Party. I didn't in this case. I couldn't understand that anyone would impugn my motives in taking the decisions that I did, but, you know, I guess I should have, you know, we should learn the lesson of that, and when something like this happens again, you deal with it quicker in a better way, and we should have done that.
So what did you get?
Was to realise how serious this was, and I think the way that this is all sort of dribbled out has not been satisfactory or right. But what I would like to think that we got right was the way that we behaved. I mean, if I could just explain the sequence of events to you, and can I preface it by saying, John, that, you know, over this past 10 days, obviously, I've had a long series of discussions with people about this issue. Up until the point in time when this all blew up, I suppose in the 6 months of government, I'd spent maybe 45 minutes an hour on Formula One in the first 6 months of government. Now, I know when you go back over it then and every single thing is picked apart, it looks as if, you know, the sort of great issue of Mr. Bernie Ecclestone and Formula One was the thing the government was concentrating on above all else, but it wasn't. However, the sequence of events quite simply was this. Before the election, Mr. Ecclestone had made a donation to the Labour Party. Yeah. After the election, we certainly thought, and this was my understanding, that he'd made a firm commitment to further donations to the Labour Party. Then we had the situation that arose, and that was back in May. The situation arose of the European Union Directive and what the government's position should be in relation to it. The European Union Directive was about banning tobacco advertising and sponsorship. The government's position right the way through was that in principle we supported the directive, but were concerned about the effect on sport, because everyone always realised there was a problem with sport. Various discussions went on about this. I saw Bernie Ecclestone and the Formula One people on the 16th of October. Now, again, I mean, this hasn't much appeared anywhere. He had already seen Chancellor Kohl of Germany a couple of weeks before. He'd seen the Prime Minister of Italy. His representatives had meetings with other senior representatives of other governments in Europe. We were all concerned that if you simply put out sponsorship, tobacco sponsorship for Formula One, because it's a global sport and all these other countries are willing to take the Grand Prix in Europe and then run them without any tobacco restrictions and then broadcast the pitches back in this country, we were concerned to make sure that we didn't end up in a situation where we lost Formula One. As at the 16th of October, we had the meeting, it was a 20-minute meeting. After that, there were various discussions about the options as to what we should do in relation to tobacco sponsorship, sport, Formula One, when at the beginning of last week it was eventually decided and the minister wrote out to a European colleague saying we actually want a specific exemption for Formula One, and this is in line with what many other countries do. At that point in time, and I want to emphasise this, I said, well, of course we can't accept any further donations from Mr. Ecclestone before any journalist had been in touch, anything to do with donations of Mr. Ecclestone. We had informed his people that we couldn't accept further donations. The question then arose, which is the question that was uppermost in my mind, what about the original donation? We decided to seek the advice of Sir Patrick Neal. We did so on the Friday, last
He's the
Friday.
chairman of the Standards Committee. Yeah.
He's the chairman of the Watchdog Committee. We got his advice back on the Monday. We published that advice and we followed it to the letter. And the reason why we took the decision on Formula One was perfectly simple, because we believed that the derogation period for sport wasn't long enough and there was a serious risk, as I say, shared by many other European countries, that if we forced them to rely not at all on tobacco sponsorship, then we would lose the industry and the Grand Prix altogether.
Right.
Time, on the 16th of October, it hadn't been decided that we should exempt Formula One.
No, that isn't the point. You knew that he was going to ask you to do that.
No, he didn't ask us to do that.
Well,
no.
he wanted help from you for his industry.
Of course.
This is the key point, isn't it? But he wanted something from you, and he'd given you £1 million.
Yes, but the point is that as at the 16th of October, there'd been no decision to exempt Formula One. We never discussed an exemption of Formula One. What would be odd, frankly, particularly after he'd seen other heads of government, including Chancellor Kohl and Prime Minister Prodi, is that because he'd been a donor to the Labour Party, you refused to see him and pass him on to somebody else in the Labour Party.
Well, that's a matter of number 10 with him.
No, because I had absolutely no intention whatever of changing the policy because of the interests of Bernie Ecclestone, plus the fact we had not decided that that was the route that we were going to go down. And the moment that we did, that was 2 weeks later, and decided, well, the route we go down is a specific exemption for Formula One, as I say, in many other countries they do. At that point in time, I said, well, look, of course, since we have decided to do that.
But it was
bizarre.
All right.
The bloke had been in a worse position as a result of donating to the Labour Party.
Should you not?
No, because at that point in time, if, for example, we had gone down the routes that were being discussed at the time, one was that the whole of the European directive, the whole series of issues in relation to this directive that were being discussed at the time, points and difficulties. One of the options was, for example, that there should be subsidiarity applied. So broad principles were set out by Europe and then national legislation. Another thing that was being discussed is that there should be a long derogation period for all sport. Yes, but the point that I'm making to you is this, because this is absolutely crucial. There was no need. Had we had a general derogation for sport, which applied equally to Formula One, there would have been no need to have returned the original gift or sought Sir Patrick Neill's advice. The issue of a conflict, appearance of a conflict of interest, only arose when we decided not to treat all sport the same, but to exempt Formula One specifically, as many other countries were doing, as other countries wanted us to do, because many other countries in Europe are supporting the position that we're taking. But so it was at that point in time that I thought that we should seek the advice of Sir Patrick Neil. Now, you can say, well, you know, you could have done it a couple of weeks ago, but I didn't think that was necessary, given that there was no appearance of conflict of interest until Formula One specifically was singled out. The problem that you have here, and it's precisely for that reason we've asked Sir Patrick Neil to look at this and to look at all the various issues that arise. Look, I am in the situation of the Labour Party where before the general election I needed to raise money for the Labour Party. I didn't want the Labour Party solely to be dependent on trade union funds.
No, I'm not raising questions about that.
No, hang on. It's important that you understand the context of this. I wanted to make sure that the Labour Party raised at least the money to fight a decent election campaign, because we were getting outspent 4 or 5 to 1 by the Tories back in the 1980s and at the previous elections. If you then seek private donations from business people, now, there is a question of principle, which is the one that I've raised, as you rightly say, with Sir Patrick Neil. If that happens...
3 weeks later, 3 weeks after that meeting.
Yes, but that was when the position arose of exempting Formula One specifically. But
that was also after the whole thing had hit the headlines. It was causing problems.
No, hang on. Now, that is where, you know, I really resent this being said.
Well, it was November the 7th.
No, hang on, John. Let me just state the facts to people, because I've said to you, I don't think we've handled this well, and we haven't. But some of the stuff that's been written in the papers and blown out of all proportion, some of the rubbish written today about David Sainsbury and people, I mean, just ridiculous nonsense. On the 5th of November, we said to Mr. Ecclestone, we can't accept any more donations from you. That was done before any inquiry had been made on any journalist. That isn't the point I'm making. Now, no, you're raising the letter of the 7th of November. The next day, right, we start to discuss, well, what are we going to do about this, the original donation? Again, before any press inquiry had been done. We discuss what the options are. We then, intervening in that period, is the French-British summit. I say, finally, look, I think we should consult Patrick Neil. I then, at the conclusion of the French-British summit on the Friday evening, look at the letter that Tom Sawyer is going to send, agree the letter that the General Secretary of the party is going to send to Sir Patrick Neil, and we send the letter.
Now, and what that
was precisely why...
And you didn't raise it with him then?
No, because the point that I'm making to you is that the very issue of principle that now arises, which is why it's important to have Sir Patrick Neil's advice on this on the long term, is any business that's going to donate. Are you telling me over the 20 years of Conservative government with the donations that were made, there was never any
No, I'm not here to talk about what the Conservatives did, because we want to clear up this business.
Exactly, but the point that I'm saying to you is there is a genuine point of principle here, that if you are going to have not state funding but private donations, I can't see myself how it's going to be possible to raise any money if whenever a business could possibly be affected by any aspect of government policy, you then say that you can't accept the donation. It's a point of principle that we need to decide.
No, it is, but I think...
straight away then. Well, I mean, look,
some people might say you do that, or you say, I'm sorry, Mr. Ecclestone, I don't think I should see you now.
Yes, but John, that is why I say to you that if what had been under discussion then was the idea that the route under discussion was that there should be an exemption for Formula One, then I think you may be right in saying that. But that wasn't. There were a whole series of options that were being discussed. Now, my judgment, and you can say whether it's right or wrong, was that it was only when it was clear there could be the appearance of a conflict of interest because we were specifically exempting Formula One, as opposed to all sport, that I then decided that we had to...
But you wrote a letter. You wrote